Hello, thinkers. Welcome back to our podcast. We are very excited to bring a special update featured in our films, The Moses Controversy and Journey to Mount Sinai, Part 1. Of course, we're referring to the world's oldest alphabet, the Proto-Sinaitic script found in Egypt in an area of the Serabit el-Khadim mines in the Sinai Peninsula. And we have two familiar faces joining us to discuss some major updates and research on these inscriptions. Our good friends, Mori Michael Shelomo Bar-Ran, and his academic advisor, Dr. Pieter van der Veen, who also played a big role in our latest film, The Israel Dilemma, Part 1. Welcome, Michael and Pieter.
Thank you so much. What an honor and privilege.
Both of you, you were a big component to our last films when it came to really making a breakthrough. Mori Michael, we filmed you in Jerusalem, I believe.
Indeed, some years ago, back in 2017.
And you are an excellent singer. I think you have a beautiful voice, and as you sang, I don't think a lot of people realized the beauty of singing Hebrew. And Pieter, we met in Germany. I think it was at your university.
Johannes Gutenberg University of Mainz.
Yes, and sometimes when I go on these journeys to interview people, I'm not always sure what's going to happen, what's going to come out, because I'm on a journey myself trying to learn about these different subject matters, and all of you have been working on a lot of things, and that's what we're excited to talk about today is what you've been working on. Why don't you give a little bit of a brief summary of these Proto-Sinaitic inscriptions, where they came from and why they're so important?
They have been known since quite some time. They were actually discovered by the famous Egyptologist and archaeologist Sir Flinders Petrie in his excavations. But it would take a few more years before they realized what the importance was of these inscriptions. But that was at the beginning of the 20th century. It was actually through the work of a German scholar, an Orientalist, Hubert Grimme, who realized that this may be an extremely important find. There are all kinds of inscriptions found at a mining site in western Sinai called Serabit el-Khadim. And these are all in Proto-Alphabetic script. And he thought, well, this may be actually Hebrew, ancient Hebrew, and there may be a close relationship to the time of Israel's history of the Exodus and Moses. It was during the 1920s, 1930s that he already realized that. And Mori Michael actually rediscovered the idea that this is very much related to this same situation.
Well, I certainly can't take credit. I really owe that very much to my mentor, David Roll. Before I actually had the merit of being academically supervised by Dr. van der Veen, I actually was introduced to this as a rabbi. I was serving as a rabbi for years, and I've made a return to academia. I've always been about, I really hate the word, but it's in, Christians use this word as well, apologetics, essentially. Defending the faith, and your media material is really just about our common ground. It's been a journey for me as well, in a sense, back to my roots, starting from this field of, apologetics, you can call it, defending the faith, to just finding a really great talent. My intellectual journey began in university. So, I have a degree in anthropology, actually, from University of California, San Diego. And now, actually, I'm returning to academia, thanks to the incredible supervision of Dr. van der Veen and David Roll, and communication with other scholars, Dr. Ludwig Morens in Bonn University. I'm actually now joining Ariel University in Israel, now pursuing a master's and perhaps even a PhD. And actually through Pieter's merit, I get to write my PhD thesis based on this work that we're going to be talking about today.
That's quite a life journey, isn't it? How this all came about. We are used to this idea of an alphabet, but there are languages, correct? A language can exist long before a writing system. What is the difference between the alphabet and a language? That's my first question.
Languages go way back into prehistory. Language is just simply how people communicate. And then when writing began with basically, pictures for words, hieroglyphs or signs, now it became possible to communicate something in written form, and people didn't need to rely on their memories. And the revolution that seems to have begun in Egypt around the 12th dynasty, but there are scholars who are entertaining the idea that it could have even begun before, but where it definitely makes its splash appearance in history is around the 12th dynasty. You have a phonetic alphabet, and basically that is a sound-based writing system that enables a whole population to learn to read and write. So, for example, Egyptian hieroglyphs, the modern standard code of Egyptian hieroglyphs, I'm sure everyone knows what they are, these pictures for words, has about 763 signs, almost 800 signs, and 26 different categories. And a lot of these are highly detailed, and you really need artistic skill to be able to draw them, to be able to write them. Now, in the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, there are about 8,700, nearly 9,000 distinct words, and you can write them all just knowing 22 simple letter signs. And that is the revolution that seems to have taken place in ancient Egypt, although maybe we'll discover that it happened elsewhere, but it's definitely based mainly on Egyptian hieroglyphs, where you have the Semites, the Hebrews, living in Egypt ostensibly, or in an Egyptian sphere of influence, and basically, being very familiar with the look of these hieroglyphs, at least, if not being scribes themselves, and said, you know what? This looks like this word in our language, and therefore we're going to ascribe to it a sound. So based on just 22 very simple signs, which are taken from these hieroglyphic signs, but some of them have been made to match our words in our spoken language, you can write nearly 9,000 individual distinct words.
And so there would be a symbol, and they would then take their spoken word and assign it to one of these symbols?
So if we take the dancing man, which is a hieroglyph, and it meant jubilant or jubilation, in hieroglyphs, it basically looks like a man with a head and two arms, and over time this would become eh. It came from our hey, like jubilation, and over time it would turn on its side and become e. The letter E originally was E in the Latin alphabet, which came from Greek, which came from the Phoenician alphabet, which is basically Hebrew. A man jubilant, or a man leading on a staff, old, stricken, or a man holding a staff of authority. For every single one of these cases, if you were an ancient Egyptian scribe, you would need to be able to draw a different variant, of a man, holding something or leaning on something, but in our language is heydad, or hey, and that simply stands for the sound ha, or in our English alphabet, which came from the Latin, H, and that will simply be an H sound. Instead of an ox head, meaning an ox head and all sorts of different variations of it for every kind of an ox or cow, how about that now stands for aleph, aleph, okay, or a, or e. In other words, vowels. So you get the idea. Just using, for example, those 2 letters added with maybe a couple of others, you can have Ha-El, the God, Ha-Av, the Father, Ha-Em, the Mother, Ha-Ach, the Brother, He-Ach, how so? He-Adam, the person. So in other words, just knowing 22 glyphs, any young person can learn how to read and how to write your entire language. That is what an alphabet is. It is a sign-based writing system.
And the reason why that was so, I think, significant for me when I was making the Moses controversy was that the question that people, they were raising was that Moses wasn't the author of the Torah. And Moses was saying things in a covenant. This covenant basically said that you were to write these words down on your doorposts, correct? And you were supposed to teach them to your children. And a lot of modern scholars are saying, well, they weren't literate. And then here we go and find this alphabetic inscriptions that, by the way, if anyone doesn't realize this, that there were people living in Egypt, and we believe that that was the Hebrews, that those were the sons of Jacob, as was prophesied to Abraham, that his descendants would be in a foreign land. If I'm correct, Pieter, Egyptians didn't arrange these letters this way. They knew somebody else did it, right? So the question was, well, who was there at that time? Could you expand on this situation?
Yes, sure. When the Israelites descended into Egypt, according to the biblical story in Genesis, it says that God had already provided for his people by actually having sent Joseph as a slave to Egypt. But God provided, and Joseph would become, the most important person under Pharaoh. So he had a lot of power and he had a lot of influence, a lot of people working for him. Just imagine also many scribes working for him in his department, in his bureaucracy. If somebody were able to actually develop something along the lines, as Mori Michael has explained, a language put down in alphabetic writing to be actually used by many more people than was actually common in Egypt, because there were just too many signs. It was very specialized. Many people could not read and write. It was the same in Mesopotamia. Akkadian was so complicated. It was really the writing of a very small elite. Here was in Egypt a person who could actually develop a script that could be read by young and old. We only have 22 letters. It is so easy to learn. The other languages that we had before that were so complicated, and there were just so few people who could actually use these scripts. Here we had a script that could be used by so many more people. Now, if one person can push this, really make this happen, then it's somebody who is a high-ranking person, who has a lot of personnel. And I think this is Joseph. Joseph indeed would have had a big part to play in the development of this alphabetic script.